Yes, thank you, Steve, for this really kind words and this introduction, and Andre for actually inviting me to our webinar lecture series and giving me the opportunity to talk about the OMA survey project results. So to keep also with the theme of the current our webinar lecture series of urban versus rural, I want to talk about the results of the Uruk period, and what is a better place than actually talking when it all happened for the first time. So the emergence of cities is commonly perceived as a major watershed moment in human history, and is at times compared to the Neolithic or even the much, much later Industrial Revolution. Each symbolizes the culmination of profound changes in the social and economic order that result in the formation of radically new political arrangements that alter irreversible all aspects of society. The earliest recorded example of such a transformation, I'm sorry, it doesn't let me, oh, yes, it's up. For some reason, it doesn't let me, okay, here we go. Sorry about this. The earliest recorded instance of such a transformation process occurred in 4th millennium BC southern Mesopotamia with the emergence of the first city called Uruk, and you can see it here on the map. Over the span of 1 millennium, which is also known as the Uruk period, the site of Varka, which is the modern name for Uruk, expanded to urban proportion, ultimately encompassing an area of 250 hectares at its peak. At the end of 4th millennium, this urban landscape not only harbored unparalleled aggregates of individuals, which has been estimated to range between 25 to 50,000 inhabitants, but was also distinguished by an array of imposing square-shaped and rectangular buildings of monumental site, which were concentrated in two precincts called the Eana. I do not know. I think each time actually there is someone admitted, I cannot move on. So I'm sorry, this is a little bit delayed. So this urban landscape was also distinguished by an array of imposing square-shaped buildings of monumental site that were concentrated in two precincts, known as the Eana, which was dedicated to the goddess Inanna, and the Kulaba, which was dedicated to the sky god Anu. As cities grew, the Neolithic communities transformed into urban stratified society with greater disparity in wealth, specialization in economic activities, and the beginning of elite control, indicated by the invention, but also, of course, by the use of tools of accounting and administration, such as cylinder seals, tokens, and clay bullae, and ultimately proto-cuneiform writing. Demographically, the Uruk period, particularly the late Uruk period, saw a settlement density that was totally unprecedented. In the hinterlands of Uruk itself, the number of settlements rose from about 11 in early Uruk period to 100 in the late Uruk period, and represents, as Hans-Jörg Nissen has said, a real consolidation of early Mesopotamian civilization. Moreover, from the middle Uruk period onwards, there was a considerable expansion of Uruk culture into neighboring regions. Uruk-type artifacts have been uncovered on sites as far as Egypt, but also in southeast Turkey, Syria, southwest Iran, and even Pakistan. The diffusion of Uruk material ranges from isolated artifacts to assemblages embedded within otherwise local culture, to settlements whose architectural remains and artifacts closely mirror the material corpus of southern Mesopotamia. The latest scenario is typically described as colonies, and which were either new foundation, as was the case, for example, in Kabul Kabira South or Jebel al-Ruda, that you can see here, or took over previous native settlements, as for example, Tobruk and Hammurabi. Sites that are characterized by a blend of indigenous and Uruk-type material have often been referred to as Uruk period enclaves or outposts within local settlements. Although describing the mechanisms behind the establishment of enclaves within local settlements or new colonies in foreign territory remains challenging. The geographic distribution of Uruk-type material. So, although describing the mechanism behind the establishment of enclaves within local settlements and new colonies in foreign territory remains challenging, the geographic distribution of Uruk-type material undeniably delineates the sphere of interaction of the Uruk world. Most scholars would concur that these interactions were closely tied to the participation in establishment or subsequent control of trade networks, through which southern Mesopotamia gained access to essential resources that itself lacked: timber, or stone, precious metals, and so forth. However, the exact nature of these interactions is difficult to ascertain, and whether or not they were based on collaboration, exploitation, or outright takeovers by force remains an open question. Some have argued that the established exchange relationships were asymmetrical, in which the poor, and in southern Mesopotamia, benefited disproportionately, while the periphery was over time reduced to supply of raw materials. However, new archaeological discoveries, particularly those of Hachinohe, have shown that communities of the periphery were no less complex compared to those of southern Mesopotamia, and suggests more equitable trade relationships. Some have suggested that the spread of Uruk material was not primarily driven by trade, but rather by disaffected segments of Uruk society venturing into foreign territories in the search of unclaimed land for them to settle or cultivate. Along these lines is the suggestion that has been posed by Hans-Jörg Nissen that the spread of Uruk material may not be the product of colonization or trade, but the result of adopting Mesopotamian innovations, particularly those related to administration and accounting, as a solution to organizational pressures and problems that had arisen in these regions just as much as it has in southern Mesopotamia. Yet others have suggested that the perplexing level of uniformity, in particular the beveled rim bowl, you can see here, across a wide region, may be the result of a continuous circulation of potters throughout the Uruk world through indigenous marriages within a new social class of craft specialists. That suggestion has been made by Henry Wright. The analysis and understanding of the Uruk phenomenon has been plagued by issues of chronology. For the longest, it was not possible to distinguish with confidence between early, middle, and late Uruk period and the Uruk material culture. What has been defined logically as the Uruk period lasted for nearly 1 millennium. In addition, much of what is known about the Uruk period comes from its later phases, which represents an endpoint of this radical transition. The late Uruk period, dating to the second half of the 4th millennium, is comparatively well understood because we have a much greater number of archaeological, iconographic, but also textual data. Guillermo Algaza, in his seminal work, Ancient Mesopotamia, the Dawn of Civilization, rightfully notes that our understanding of the process leading up to the emergence of an urban civilization in Mesopotamia is very limited. Yet it has received a lot of attention in the academic discourse and is always upheld as one of the first, if not the first, example of early state formation and urban growth. The major issue with understanding this process is that we lack suitable archaeological data of the formative phases of this urban transformation, which is thought to have been made in the early Uruk period. The exposure of excavated Uruk layers at places such as at Nippur, also Abu Salbi, Kafaji, Eridu, of course in Uruk itself, has been very restricted in scale, but also, as was the case in Uruk, focused primarily on administrative and religious center. Moreover, in that case, the recovered artifacts was very small, as the excavated buildings had been cleaned out in antiquity. The available pottery chronology from Uruk remains very problematic, yet it has functioned as a yardstick to date pottery and artifacts from other places, in particular those of the neighboring regions in modern-day Turkey, Syria, and southwest Iran. For one, the collection of pottery in early phases of the excavation at Uruk was very unsystematic, and restricted only to full vessels and decorated pottery sherds. Even though the deep sounding was thought to rectify the lack of a pottery chronology, the attribution of pottery shapes and artifacts to specific time frames is by no means secure. The layers of the deep sounding were all trash layers, and none of the findings can be considered in situ. The layers, and there are 18 of those, and the materials found within them were nevertheless attributed chronologically to the buildings underneath that had not only been cleaned out in antiquity, but also reduced to wall stumps and filled in with earth from other places to create platform for subsequent buildings. So there's very likely a fair amount of mix-up of the material culture occurred. The pottery chronology from the deep sounding of Uruk has been restudied and revised. However, as Hans-Jörg Nissen has noted, later studies have only strengthened the problematic chronology rather than corrected it, as the initial dating of the different layers was not questioned. This issue can also not be remedied by cross-referencing the Uruk sequence with those from Nippur, as it lacks the earliest phases of Ubaid and early Uruk period. In addition, the middle and late Uruk assemblage from Nippur is very limited. Pottery sequences from other sites, such as Abu Salabik, Eridu, Talueli, and Ur, are useful reference points. However, most of these sequences are relatively short. The absence of a reliable pottery chronology had far-reaching consequences, particularly for other big data sets that scholars have relied on in the study of the emergence of urbanism in the Uruk period and, of course, the Uruk expansion, that is settlement data. When such data were collected on a large scale in the 1950s by Robert McCormack Adams and Hans-Jörg Nissen and others, no extensive reliable pottery sequence for Mesopotamia existed, and they could not distinguish between early, middle, and late Uruk period, but conflated the early and middle Uruk period. Thus, the data lacked a chronological resolution to describe the settlement pattern and demographic trends leading up to the emergence of the first cities and any insightful detail. Moreover, as has been highlighted by Susan Pollock's work, certain demographic trends inferred from the available data are in fact the result of the low chronological resolutions rather than actual settlement behavior or population movements. One of the most notable examples is the proposed reversal of population and settlement trends, where the northern part of the alluvial plain, that is the Nippur-Adab region, witnessed a significant decline, while the Uruk-Varkar region in the further south experienced a corresponding increase. These trends have been interpreted by Robert McCormack Adams as indicative of a significant population shift from the northern regions to the south. As Pollock's reanalysis of the settlement data shows, a fundamentally different picture emerges when the so-called contemporaneity problem is taken into consideration, spearheaded by Robert Debord. It's also what's called the Debord method. The contemporaneity problem highlights the challenge that arises when a site yields archaeological material from a specific historical period, but may not have been continuously occupied throughout its entirety. Additionally, it underscores that sites appearing contemporaneous based on artifacts may have actually been occupied at different points in time, which complicates the chronological interpretation. By correcting the data, Pollock actually demonstrates that the northern Nippur-Adab region, instead of declining, experienced a modest population and settlement increase. Hence, the sustained surge in settlements in the Uruk-Varkar region, even after corrections, so basically there was definitely an increase, cannot be solely attributed to the widespread immigration from the north. This example just illustrates how the absence of a reliable and detailed chronology for the Uruk period may obscure patterns and trends that could provide important insights into the formative phases of early urbanism and state formation. A more superior chronology than what is currently available would also considerably advance our understanding of the Uruk expansion. It would facilitate a more precise reconstruction. Oh, sorry. It would facilitate a more precise reconstruction of the timeline of the Uruk incursion and document its complexity, based on which we could offer more accurate insights into what may have driven people from the Uruk region to establish themselves in distant land and embed themselves in foreign nations. So in order to trace the process that supported urban growth and socio-political evolution in southern Mesopotamia, we not only need to generate new data sets that are more representative of the Uruk phenomenon in both the rural and urban context, but also make a concerted effort to expand and refine the existing pottery and artifact chronologies for the Uruk. First results of the UMA survey project indicates that such data can be generated by an approach that uses systematic sampling strategies based on survey grids, but while at the same time actively pursuing the building of a more reliable and representative pottery chronology for the southern alluvium. The UMA survey project aims at conducting a comprehensive archaeological reconnaissance of an area of approximately 2,000 square kilometers, located in the vicinity of the modern city Al-Rifai, which is a town located on a main route between the Nasiriyah in the south and Al-Qud further to the north. This area, as you know, has been of great historical importance, as it was once the arena of the first documented interstate water conflict between the city-state Lagash and Umma in the late 3rd millennium BC. A couple hundred years later, the Umma region became a province of first the Akkadian state and the following kingdom of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, with the city Umma itself being among the most important regional centers in both periods. There is some evidence that the Umma region may have been of considerable importance during the Uruk period as well, and may have undergone a process of urbanization. Robert England suggested that a collection of unprovenienced archaic tablets comparable to those that have been found at Uruk may have originated either from Umma or the neighboring city Adab, and that both places were additional centers of proto-cuneiform writing. If true, this evidence suggests that the ancient city of Umma controlled economies of similar size and complexity as that of Uruk and other known urban centers. The Umma region has only been partially covered by the survey efforts by Robert McCormick, Adams, and Hans-Jörg Missner in the 1950s and 60s. More recently, the region has been resurveyed in the context of a broad-scale cultural research, cultural heritage preservation effort in Tikrit province by late Abdul Amir Hamdani. And Abdul Amir Hamdani has provided a comprehensive map of confirmed archaeological sites which our research builds on. There has been 5 field seasons of the Umma survey project, with the first one in March 2018, of only 10 days, and a 2-week season in December of 2018, so in the same year. And there was obviously a long pause during the pandemic, and we resumed our work in April 22. And with a follow-up study season in December of the same year, and have just completed our 5th season this past December into mid-January. So by now we have surveyed an area of approximately 600 square kilometers. So you can see like a purple shaded area, that's what we have surveyed so far, and systematically surveyed 57 sites. We have adopted a systematic sampling strategy based on a 50 by 15 meter survey grid and detailed intra-site analysis of the surface record of individual sites. While surveying in this fashion is very time consuming, it's also why we're not as quick to survey the entire area, I want to show how this approach allows us not only to pursue our goal of building a more reliable and representative pottery chronology for the region, but in turn allows us to generate data with greater chronological resolution that have the potential to shed light on the process leading up to the urban revolution in southern Mesopotamia, and also provide important insight into other periods. In the first two seasons, we loaded base maps with the survey grids on handheld Gaussian GBS systems and used paper forms to note additional information. However, this method did actually prove too inflexible. The survey grids are predefined or had to be predefined based on the initial remote sensing analysis. And often, once we arrived on the ground, sites turned out to be bigger or smaller. As can be seen here in this case, it was a lot more. Site was actually a lot bigger than I had initially thought. So since April 22, we have now switched to a mobile GIS app called QField of the Geographic Information Software QGIS in combination with a cloud-based spatial database. The QField app allows us for the survey grid to be edited in the field to reflect the situation on the ground, but also makes it possible to digitize any kind of features of interest, such as architectural remains, walls or kilns, or extent of looting and so forth. So basically anything of interest. Furthermore, each of these files of the survey grid have an attribute table, and that has enhanced the efficiency of data collection in the field considerably. The information that's entered directly into the attached attribute form includes basic information such as the date, who surveyed the square, but more importantly, also lets us record what artifacts we do not collect but are of importance, such as large stones, slags, or bricks. In addition, this app has also the feature that you can embed photographs. So basically like a fairly well-rounded and holistic documentation of the sites that we survey. At the end of the day, the data collected by different surveyors is synchronized and then stored in the cloud. So QGIS is an open software. I will mention it's not bug-free. It has a lot of bugs that it suffers from, but it is a software that most of our Iraqi colleagues are familiar with and have access to without any license restrictions. But that's also why I prefer it, even though I have to contend with it's sometimes a bit difficult to navigate. So also, moreover, since April 22, we have updated our survey permit to be able to clean sections of looting holes, which are deep enough that they expose a site's stratigraphy. And you can see one example of that on the slide. The Umma region, as some of you may know, is heavily affected by looting, and we are yet to come across a site that has not been looted. And it is for that reason paramount that we collect as much data as we can when we document these sites, because looting continues. In addition, we have also begun now to document each site by drone imagery, which not only provides us then with high resolution photographs of each site, but also allows us further to monitor looting across the region when we compare it to the satellite imagery, which tend to be 4 to 10 years, most of the time 4 to 10 years older. So you can see actually how the sites are faring across the region with regards to looting. The 57 sites that we have surveyed so far date to a period from as early as the 6th millennium till the 2nd millennium BC, followed by a hiatus of nearly a millennium, until the era gets resettled again at the end of the 1st millennium BC and the beginning of the 1st millennium AD. The result corresponds well with what has been documented, or the settlement history that has been documented by Adams and Nissen further to the west. And it has been argued that the widespread abandonment of sites after the Old Babylonian period can be attributed to the rivers changing their course and leaving most of the area without water. It was not until the 1st millennium BC and AD when empires of the early antiquity made a concerted effort to restore the water supply to former productive agricultural areas. As a result, many of the sites dating to the late 3rd and 2nd millennium have been reoccupied by, Parthian, Sasanian, and Perforce occupations. As can be seen, and has also been documented in other regions, there's a drastic increase in settlements during the Uruk period. The increase that you see here on this in this graph is in numbers of settlements and not in total occupied area. Since we have not analyzed all the data that we have collected so far, I do not know yet what that number is in detail. So our project is in a fortunate position that our lead ceramics specialist and co-director and co-author, Angelo Di Michele, is also a member of the Bidosou Excavation Project, which is led by Sebastian Ray and the British Museum. Through that cooperation, we have access to newly excavated pottery material from secured stratigraphic contexts that can be assigned to early, middle, and late Uruk period with certainty. Those pottery indicators, though small in number, are important chronological corner points based on which we're able to identify occupational layers that date to a single period. The pottery material found in the areas to date to either early, middle, or late Uruk period, in turn, allows to expand and refine the existing pottery typology to enhance its chronological resolution, as well as increase its representativeness of pottery traditions of the Uruk period for both the rural and urban context. In the past, most of it has been actually focused on the urban context. 16 of the 57 surveyed sites date to the 4th millennium, with 4 having a single period occupation. 3 of them date to the Middle Uruk period, and 1 dating to the Late Uruk. The size of the sites dating to the Uruk period range between half a hectare to 13 hectares, with the majority falling into the small hamlet and village category. The ability to distinguish between early, middle, and late Uruk period provides important insights into the demographic trends underlying urban growth in southern Mesopotamia. As you can see on the graph, there's a significant increase in numbers of settlements in the Middle Uruk period, with a considerable amount of new foundations of settlements. As mentioned earlier, 3 out of the 4 single period sites date to the Middle Uruk period. The abandonment of several Middle Uruk sites in the Late Uruk period could be an indicator of urban growth, which consumed some of or part of the rural population. But at this point, our data set is too small to really support this conclusion with any certainty. The ability to distinguish between early, middle, and late Uruk allows to provide a more accurate dating for important artifacts that may offer insights into the economic foundation of early urbanism in Mesopotamia. Finds that we encounter on Uruk period sites range from artifacts related to agriculture, such as clay sickles, flint plates, but also clay pickaxes, and of course, those related to the exploitation of aquatic and maritime resources, such as fishnet weights and clay sickles that were used to cut reed, sedge, and other aquatic plants. But we also encounter artifacts indicative of trade and production of commodities, such as those related to the textile production, as well as exotic and status validating objects, such as stone molds and vessels and decorative clay coats. I want to focus for a moment on clay sickles. Even though clay sickles are ubiquitous on Uruk period sites, they have received very little attention in the archaeological literature. To this date, there are only 2 studies who have been provided insight into their use as well as their chronological distribution. Based on the analysis of clay sickle from the Uruk mound at Abu Salabik, Nancy Benko showed that clay sickles were very prevalent in the Proto-Early and Middle Uruk period, and were slowly replaced by flint sickles in the Late Uruk period and the Chembet Nasr period. We have since independently confirmed this chronological pattern for several sites in the Umma region. The chronological distribution is particularly clear from the site called Bashir, seen here on the slide. This is a 10-hectare site that was occupied from the early Uruk period up to the early Dynastic I period. This site has 2 distinct settlement mounds, as you can see, heavily looted, and I believe that part of the site has been raised by agricultural activities. Our square-by-square analysis on the surface record allowed us to show that the early Uruk occupation was concentrated at northern part of the site, while the late Uruk occupation in the southern part of the site. The site appears to grow considerably during the Middle Uruk period and diminishes again in the late Uruk period. When plotting sickles, as well as the distribution of the iconic beveled rim bowl, both were clearly associated with early and middle Uruk, with the clay sickles showing an even closer association with the early Uruk occupation. We were able to confirm this also in other sites, that clay sickles were associated with early and middle Uruk period. This finding is insofar significant as the use-ware analysis on clay sickles from the Ubaid levels at Tel El-Weli by Anderson Verfoe showed that they were used not only for cutting grain, but also for cutting aquatic plants such as reed and sedges. The use-ware analysis further revealed that sickles' shape differed according to their use, with those for cutting reed having a closed form and a narrow blade, which you can see here on the right, while those used for cutting grain had an open form with a broader plate. Thus, as such, clay sickles are important indicators of grain production, as well as the exploitation of aquatic resources, whose quantification would provide important insights to describe the kind of economies that had once underpinned urban growth and the emergence of sociopolitical complexity in the Uruk period. Scholars have suggested that the interregional trade networks of the late Uruk period built on early local exchange systems among communities who specialized in exploiting a variety of complementary ecosystems of southern Mesopotamia. The products from such specialized producers could include grain from arable land in the alluvial plain, fruits and vegetables and flax from orchards near canals and rivers, to, of course, sheep and goat and cattle raised on fallow or recently harvested fields, or the extensive pasture at the fringes of marshlands, and, of course, the exploitation of wetlands, waterfowl and fish, but also wild boar, for example. So, if correct, the clay sickles with the broader plate versus the narrow plate could become key in identifying communities specialized more on exploitation of wetlands versus those primarily engaged in the cultivation of grain. The surface find from a site called Abu Jarabir, dating to the Ubaid period up to the early dynastic period, with a Seleucid Parthian occupation later on, show that such a distinction may be possible. While the Ubaid community at Abu Jarabir engaged in the cultivation of grain, which is shown by clay sickles with a broader plate, or the other artifacts that we had found on the surface focus primarily on the exploitation of wetlands. Not only did we find the characteristic sickle with a narrow plate that was used for cutting reed, but other artifacts such as wood, fishnet weights of different shapes for fishing, and these egg-shaped objects that you can see here on the slide may have been slingshot projectiles used to hunt waterfowl, and that is based on the ethnographic or ethnoarchaeological study done by Edward Oxenschlager at Lagash. So plotting the findings of clay sickles and as well as beveled rim bowls on other sites in the Umma region provides potential insight into the evolution of trade in the early and middle Uruk period. Out of the 57 sites that we have surveyed, there were additional 12 sites that did not have any Uruk period pottery, except for the beveled rim bowl and clay sickles, and in some cases, only clay sickles. The geographic distribution of regular Uruk sites that have the classic Uruk artifact assemblages, such as consisting of pottery and other items, to those with only consisting of clay sickles and beveled rim bowls show distinct different patterns. Most of the 16 regular Uruk sites were concentrated at the center of the alluvium, where the 4th and 3rd millennium watercourses are thought to have been located. The geographic distribution of sites with only Babel-Grimbold and Sickles show a very different geographic distribution. Not only are they concentrated along a corridor stretching west to east, but some of the sites were some 20 to 30 kilometers away from the concentration of regular Uruk sites. Clearly, some occupation of these sites existed in the Uruk period, but what might appear as a temporary or ephemeral, and suggest that these may represent outposts either related to trade or the exploitation of specific resources. The fact that we have found pieces of obsidian in Al Jumeirah, which is the site furthest away from regular Uruk sites at the center of the alluvium, in the square where we also found sickles and pieces of the Babel-Grimbold, suggests that these outposts may have been related or connected to trade. An alternative explanation has been provided by Henry Wright, because Henry Wright rightfully notes that while the general lack of resources in the southern alluvium is often cited as the main reason for international trade or interregional trade, he notes that many useful and valuable resources were only in a few days' radius, travel radius. Among those are that east of the Zagros foothills were fine grained stone useful for making flint plates, bitumen found in the middle Euphrates and middle Tigris Valley, but also in Khuzestan in Iran, as well as hardwood trees that were only 2 to 3 travels away from major population aggregates. Particularly dense concentration of medium gray cherts are found northwest of Susa and southeast of Lower Mesopotamia. The analysis of flint plates from Abu Salabit provided evidence that the chert used for the flint plates there actually came from that region. And thus, Wright suggests that finds like that may not be actually a sign of exchange or trading, but indeed, many of these resources could have been obtained by direct visits of procurement groups. Maybe a little bit far-fetched, but it's possible that these outposts of the sites that have aligned from like a corridor to the east may have been related to the procurement of said resources. And we do find actually this gray chart that Wright has talked about, and also actually coming from the excavation that he has conducted at Khuzestan. We have obviously not done exactly the analysis yet, but we do find a lot of these flints on Uruk period sites. So in this context, the Babel-Grimbold may also not be understood as an artifact of the distribution of ration by central authority to laborers, but potentially as portable bread pans or ovens for bread making. That has been suggested by Daniel Potts for Babel-Grimbolds that are found in the Iranian plateau, very similar to the Egyptian Bajas of Open in Egypt. New residues analysis of Babel-Grimbolds from the Middle Euphrates region in modern-day Syria provide not 100% conclusive, but very suggestive evidence that these bowls indeed have been used to make leavened bread. Given that secrets, as have been shown before, date to the early and middle Uruk period, suggest that these patterns that are shown do reveal some insights into the evolution of trade networks that may have fueled the emergence of the cities and sociopolitical complexity. Insights into the evolution of trade is provided by another single period site of Adlai. This 3-hectare site is just less than 1 kilometer north of the city of Sabalan, and has a single occupation dating to the late Uruk period, with a much later occupation dating to the Protean-Sasanian period. The surface record of the site contains, next to many late Uruk pottery pieces, however not the Babel-Grimbold, also objects that you can see here on the slide, which resemble very much the eye idols that have been found on many sites, particularly those of northern Mesopotamia and which have been called clay spectacle idols. Clay spectacle idols have been found in layers dating to the 4th millennium in northern Iraq and Tel Gabra, but also in Syria in Tel Hamakar and Tel, also in Anatolia in Aslan Tepe, and on the Iranian plateau in Chaganoush. It has been suggested that this artifact was a tool used in textile production, either in dyeing wool or creating wool threads through the two perforated openings. Square-shaped work-stoned objects, all round, of the same size and weight, were found in the same or adjacent space to the clay spectacle, suggesting that they may have been used in textile production as well, even though I do not know exactly how. The finding of Edlale may be indicative of an expanding production of wool textiles, and which was the prime export commodity fueling international or interregional trade, particularly of the late Old Period. It has been argued that the production of wool and textile in the late Old Period reached industrial scale and appears, as far as we can tell, to be an urban phenomenon controlled by elites and conducted or carried out by dependent women. Algazi suggests, however, that activities related to the wool production, such as raising sheep, plugging the wool, washing it, sorting it, transporting, spinning, forming it, may have been done in subsidiary smaller settlements surrounding the urban places. In that regards, the site's proximity to the city of Sabalam may be significant. Even though the excavated layers in Sabalam date to later periods, Adams and Nissen do note that the occupation of the site may have started in the Uruk period. Thus, Edlale may represent such a subsidiary site where activities related to wool production would have taken place during the late Uruk period. I hope I was able to show the potential of newly collected archaeological data with higher chronological resolution provide insights into the type of economies that underpinned the urban revolution in Mesopotamian alluvium. I hope we have also shown that having a better chronological control over some key artifacts has the potential in providing insights in the evolution of trade and trade commodities. Algazi has pointed out that scholars of the ancient Near East have not sufficiently considered the role of trade in understanding or explaining early urbanism in Mesopotamia. Trade is often key in the initial evolution of cities, but also cements their central place later on in the settlement hierarchy. Furthermore, the related cross-cultural interaction engender and also explain social change. Particularly related innovation in transportation and communication technologies, as well as the management of labor and resources, can be decisive in the process of socio-political evolution and urbanism. Algazi argues that southern Mesopotamia, with its command over 2 rivers, had a significant advantage over other regions as Euphrates and Tigris provide ample water for irrigation, but more importantly, easy access to cheap transport, which positioned Mesopotamia favorably with respect to other regions, and is in part the reason why, as Algazi argues, the development of an urban civilization developed there ahead of most places around the world. The available data of the Uruk period to test these hypotheses that Algazi has brought forward in his book are grossly inadequate. They are by no means representative, and on top lack the chronological resolution necessary to trace the evolution of trade and its related creation of economic scales that fueled the urban transformation. We hope that we have shown that our approach, based on systematic sampling and recording strategies, allows to generate such data even from surface records. In addition, our data sample is more representative as it includes the systematic study also of rural sites. While we have not yet tackled the major sites in the Ona region, we expect that once we do, a more complete picture will emerge, and that our research will be able to make important contribution to the understanding of early urbanism in ancient Mesopotamia. Thank you very much.